Hello, good evening. Tonight, I bring you a discussion on the Havamal, and I'm joined by Walrus. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Um, I'm glad to be on here and help out with with your exploration into Norse mythology. I can say, as I did when I visited on Nordhuger's stream about Iceland, that I'm certainly no expert in Norse mythology, but I have had an interest for a while. And as we discussed before the stream started, it actually goes back about 10 years, give or take, when I first read the Havamal. So this is a very wonderful opportunity to dive into it again with a bit more life experience.
And certainly, well, as I was also saying before we went live, is I've only really read it recently as part of the wider Poetic Edda, just to give more context for the audience. So, Havamal is a poem that centrally features on the god Odin. The etymology of the name, it means the words or the ballad of the High One, being one of Odin's titles. So it's from a collection of poems, the Poetic Edda, quite a huge collection that was put together in the 13th century by a scholar, a Snorri Sturluson, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yes,
It's
one of the
lot,
big names in Norse history.
yes, and no, he was from Iceland, and so a lot of in fact, the sagas and Norse poetry is composed in Iceland by figures such as Snorri. Though the Edda is not the original text. The original text is a body of work composed around the same time called the Codex Regius, or the royal text. Again, if I've got the etymology right there. So that's where a lot of this is derived from. With the subtitle here, I've got Odinic wisdom. So with the Havamal, it is I think the longest poem actually of the Poetic Edda. It's also the second one, so it's relatively early, and it's one of the more better known or famous poems. The other one being the first one, the Voluspa, which I did a video on, and so it centers on the figure of Odin, and it's sort of is him giving words of wisdom to the reader, and it makes for quite a cozy read. I would actually say.
It has that element of Norse mythology which I haven't sort of been able to find anywhere else. Now that might be for a lack of reading, obviously, but uh, it has a bit of a nod and a wink in the way that some of this is delivered, and I think that's an important aspect of the Norse culture because Odin, as part of his travels or his legends, I suppose, at some point steals the what's called the mead of poetry from I can't remember who he steals it from. It's not that important.
Gunlord.
Right. Thank you. I think what's important is the combination and the importance of verse and song and the skalds in Nordic culture, as they were called, as storytellers and keepers of wisdom, and them falling under Odin's sort of area of power. Also, hopefully, I have various translations of the Havamal up here in front of me because I have noticed that when reading the English ones, sometimes things are lost in translation.
Oh,
So
that's
I'll
good.
try
Good
to
to.
provide some context if I can.
Oh, thank you. That's good to know. Yes, because as I mentioned, I've got actually two versions of the Havamal. Because Imperium Press, not only did they put out the entire Poetic Edda as part of their Studies in Reaction series, they also put the Havamal out on its own right. And I've got both. I'm actually using the Studies in Reaction version because it's a bit more smaller and more compact and easy to refer to, specifically for this poem. But both versions, that version and the version in the Edda, it's the Henry Adams Bellows translation, which was done back in the 1920s, who was an American figure who actually founded I think it's the American Scandinavian Association or Society,
Interesting.
which was a Yeah. Right. So first things first. So here I just wanted to start with. So these are two sort of, I guess you could call them frontispiece. So they're both from different versions of the Poetic Edda, done by two different artists in sort of the late 19th and early 20th century. So on the left we've got one by W.G. Collingwood, who was a famous sort of British artist. So this is his one called The Stranger at the Door, which I quite like because you've got the door there and with Odin knocking and him all cloaked and almost in disguise, because that is a quite notable characteristic of Odin, is that he's almost always in disguise whenever you read him in any of the sagas or the poems. Sort of adds to his mystique. And then on the right, this is one from a different version of the Edda. This is one by Lorenz Frolic, who was a Danish artist and engraver. So what's your thoughts on these two sort of artworks, Walrus?
Well, I think what you say about him being in disguise is sort of important. He does sort of occupy the archetype of the wanderer or the wise wanderer, I suppose, that a lot of cultures probably can recognize. Except that while many other mythologies put sort of the strongest god, and make no mistake, Odin is certainly one of the more powerful ones in the among the Aesir, um, but maybe not the most bombastic compared to someone like Zeus or any of the Roman ones. We have one who would favor um, keenness of mind and wisdom instead, but also kindness and uh, prudence, I suppose.
Hmm. Though also, yeah, Odin isn't kind when he's pissed off. If
Oh, sorry.
you,
Yes. I mean, kindness was lost in translation. Maybe I'm looking for the word for sort of inviting strangers into your home and feeding them.
maybe the word courtly, because he is the
Courtly,
leader
yes,
of he's the leader
that's what
of
I'm
the
looking
Norse.
for. Yes,
Yes, he's
kind
leader of the
is the wrong translation.
yes, because that is an important theme of the Havamal. Is in fact the very first, because with the Havamal, it's debated, but it's often agreed upon that it's people break it down into several different sections, and one breakdown, which I agree with, is in the Imperium Press edition. There's a guy who's a scholar on sort of Norse culture and mythology called Tristan Powers, and he does a lot of introductions to the poems in the Imperium Press edition of the Poetic Edda. And in his introduction for the Havamal, he sort of breaks it down into 5 different sections. And broadly, what he and most other scholars agree on is the first half of the Havamal is called the now I apologise for any pronunciations I get wrong, but it's the Gestafatir, I think is how it's said, which
Yeah.
literally means the guest section. And this first half of the Havamal deals with advice to guests and is very courtly.
It's advice to guests and advice to hosts and advice in how to act in public society, basically. I'm not sure if I'm sure a lot of religions and mythologies have similar sort of codes of conduct written down, but I can't think of any comparison off the top of my head.
I having read both the Iliad and the Odyssey, hospitality is definitely something important in both of those works, because not so much the Iliad, but in the Odyssey definitely, because for example, very early on in the Odyssey, there is a section called the Telemachy, which deals with Odysseus' son Telemachus, and he's not sure what to do because his father's been missing for years. He's at home. You've got all of these suitors who are trying to bang his mother, and he asks them to leave. They don't leave, so he frets a
Right.
bit. Athena comes to help him, and she's like, "Oh, let's go off and see if we can find your father." And sort of early on, he bumps into an old Greek warrior called Nestor with his sons, and Nestor sort of invites him to sit down, offers him meat, and they have a nice chin wag. But then later on, Telemachus comes to the court of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, the husband of Helen of Troy, which kicked off the whole Iliad. And again, when he knows Telemachus is the son of Odysseus, he's really welcoming and invites him in, and that's a recurring theme. And again, going
Right.
back to the suitors at the very end of the Odyssey. Sorry for any spoilers for anybody who's not read it, but Odysseus violently murders all the suitors because they were poor guests. They
Yeah.
imposed themselves on his home while he was away and tried to
Hmm.
bang his wife. So in his mind, they're
That is
terrible
something
guests.
that is certainly clear in the Havamal in the guest section is to be kind to strangers, but very harsh to your enemies. Um, once they reveal themselves as such.
I think the emphasis is transgression. Transgression is not tolerated.
Yeah, at all. Not at all. It is very clear.
Yeah, so what I would like to do is also do just some reading from the Gestaffata. So I just want to read the first few stanzas because they create like a nice welcoming tone. So, within the gate a man shall go, full warily let him watch, full long let him look about him, for little he knows where foe may lurk, and sit in the seats within. Hail to the giver, a guest has come, where shall the stranger sit? Swift shall he be who with sword shall try the proof of his might to make. Fire he needs who with frozen knees has come from the cold without. Food and clothes must the farer have, the man from the mountains come. Water and towels and welcoming speech should he find who comes to the feast. If renown he would get and again be greeted, wisely and well must he act.
I think that sums it up pretty much. Again, it's a very interesting way of delivering this through basically song or poetry all the way through, um, instead of just being a list of rules, basically.
No, because you need a bit of rhyme, makes it more
Yeah,
interesting.
of course.
And something else to speculate on is obviously, as I said, the Poetic Edda and the Codex Regius were all put together in the 13th century, though it's believed they have a much older heritage than that. It was only they were just all written down then.
Oh yeah,
In
yeah, probably.
Yeah, and so I like to think that like the Homeric poems that I mentioned, which had a very strong oral tradition, because for many hundreds of years they were performed orally over several hours before they were written down. So I wonder if it's the same with the Havamal. Maybe it was meant to be read aloud before it was meant to be read, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, most likely. Most likely it was passed down in oratory traditions for a long time. Again, going back to the position of skald and poet in Norse society, which is, I think, more important than many other positions in the Norse society.
Mm. And so, other than those few introductory stanzas, there's quite a few what I would say are recurring themes in the Gestaffata. The main one is that of wisdom, as I've speculated on before. So, I'm just going to read another couple to illustrate that. So, wits must he have who wanders wide, but all is easy at home. At the witless man the wise shall wink when among such men he sits. A man shall not boast of his keenness of mind, but keep it close in his breast. To the silent and wise does ill come seldom, when he goes as guest to a house. For a faster friend one never finds than wisdom tried and true. The knowing guest who goes to the feast is in silent attention sits. With his ears he hears, with his eyes he watches. Thus wary are wise men all. Happy the one who wins for himself favour and praise is fair. Less safe by far is the wisdom found than is hid in another's heart. So, as you've mentioned, I think before the stream in the Havamal, there seems to be a little bit of like a bit of a nod and a wink going on, and that very much illustrates itself with that.
Yeah,
At the
some of
witness
these
man, the wise
verses
shall wink.
are Yeah, some of these verses are, can be pretty much summed up as "shut up and you might learn something," right? um, to put it bluntly, but it goes obviously deeper than that, and um, there's many verses that talks about, how much someone who knows very little can speak, right? And you think about what we tend to call midwits, right? People who, um, I suppose, inhabit the top of the bell curve of the IQ charts, or maybe they occupy squarely within sort of the Dunning-Kruger area of life, where they've tasted a morsel of information of something, and then they sort of decry themselves experts on it, and they can talk for hours. And meanwhile, someone who, as the saying goes, the wise man knows how little he knows, right? Someone who's willing to shut up and listen for a while might actually learn something new or get a fresh perspective on something. And it's not a competition about being the loudest.
Certainly, and you saying that reminded me of that. There's a famous quote from Socrates, and they're going back to the Greeks again, but he once said, "The oracle knew that I was the wisest of all the Greeks because I alone of all the Greeks know that I know nothing."
Right.
Yeah. And but also going back to midwits, well, that's the thing with the midwits. If you've seen the chart, they're not actually that high. The point of a midwit is they're middling
Exactly.
intelligence. They're about 100, like, so they're average.
Hmm.
So they're not dumb, but they're not geniuses. And the point
Right.
is they overly rely on having a decent natural intelligence, but they don't cultivate it through reading or any wider life experience or wisdom.
Yeah. They're smart enough to be dangerous, as you could say. Um,
Yes.
but of course, implicit in this, is sort of the willingness to admit that you don't know anything, and that that I don't know anything, even showing up here. I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments who know way more than me about all this stuff, right? There's a it takes a certain amount of sort of introspection to be able to internalize that and be okay with sort of the uncomfortableness of, well, I actually can't know everything, right? I can't know everything at all at once, right? I'm not omnipotent, I
No.
guess is the word. But I'm
No.
willing to, step up and see if I can try to figure this out. But that requires, in a sense, it requires a bit of an ego death, and for a lot of people, that is very difficult.
I mean, you need to have humility, because only God is omnipotent or
Exactly.
all-seeing, all-knowing. And again, I'm think back to the stream you had me on for the Longhouse, where we looked at loneliness, and you've got these ideas of the century of the self. Modern man is incredibly self-absorbed and selfish and thinks he knows everything.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We certainly live in a time uh, where we've fooled ourselves into thinking that we don't need anything else other than ourselves. And if you ask someone, probably like, I guess, academic agent, he would say that this is sort of one of the cores of the boomer truth regime that we're living under. But I'm not sure if that is true.
What
It's certainly starting to sort of uh, break at the seams these days, right?
Well, no, I think either that side of the Boomer Truth regime, the unlimited individual self-expression, has got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, because it obviously doesn't track, right? It's not. It cannot coexist with reality, and every day our regime is expending more and more power to exist outside of reality.
No, exactly. Just to go back to the poem itself. So, other than wisdom, there are a few other themes that do crop up in the Gestaffata. Other ones I noticed is there's actually quite a few stanzas on about drinking, which I found quite humorous. So I'm going to give those
Yes.
a read. So, okay. A better burden may no man bear for wanderings wide than wisdom. Worse food for the journey he brings not afield than an over drinking of ale. Less good there lies than most believe in ale for mortal men, for For the more he drinks, the less does man of his mind the mastery hold. Over beer the bird of forgetfulness broods and steals the minds of men. With the heron's feathers fettered I lay, and in Gunloft's house was held. Drunk I was dead drunk, when with Fiala ways I was. Till the best of drinking, if back one brings his wisdom with him home.
Can I get the numbers on that just to be sure? Because I think I had a note.
That was stanzas 11 through 14, so relatively early.
Yeah, I thought so. Let me just double check. No, it's fine. I don't have any notes on this one. But it is again that humor sort of rears its head again. Um, about sort of drinking too much, and this is where the sort of I guess the uh, code of conduct part of Havamal really sets in terms of giving lessons about what you should and shouldn't do at parties. I guess.
No, and it was interesting because there's a line, and in Gunloft's house I held. So before we went live, I think you mentioned about Odin acquiring the mead of poetry. Well, Gunloft or Gunlod is the one he acquires it from, and so this is actually a reference to that event.
Yeah,
Sidring's talking about drinking, and we'll get to it later, but he goes back to this episode again in a bit more detail.
yeah, he does later on in the high 80s or something. I don't quite remember.
Yes, it's the Odin's love poems, which is after the Gestafatter.
Exactly, yes. Which is a quite a fun. I mean, I suppose we shouldn't get into that yet, but there are a bit. They have like a section that could basically be called like on women, and Odin's love quest is
Yes,
part of that. But I did have picked
yes. In
out.
terms of other themes for the Gestafatter,
I did have
okay,
picked
yeah.
out one. Um, I mean, of course, there's quite a lot of themes, but here and there are a couple of sort of you would call it life advice or just like nuggets of wisdom that have seemed to sort of just randomly make their way into it. Um, and I particularly like number 16. Now, I don't have the same translation as you do. Um, So I'm probably gonna have a bit of a different rhyme. But 16, I don't know if you want to read that because I noted something about the translation for the Norse and the Norwegian one that's different from the way I've seen it in English.
Okay, I'll read it, and then if it's wildly different to what you've got, can you possibly read your version or?
Of course.
Okay. So, 16. The sluggard believes he shall live forever if the fight he faces not, but age shall not grant him the gift of peace, though spears may spare his life. So I actually had this one noted down as well, because there's the one before at 15 and a couple other later seem to be themed around courage and bravery in battle.
Yes. Which is what I was getting into, but not just in battle. It's I think I read this one as a bit more also about not being sort of afraid of taking any risk at all. Because when I'm reading the Norse version, which I'm not fluent in Norse, but when I'm reading the Norwegian or like the Danish version, I'm getting a bit it's not at it's not as panicked as the English one makes it seem. Um in terms of like how afraid the coward is. It's almost admonishing him for being um, a coward out of laziness, sort of trying to urge him on. So, as you said, courage is probably the right theme here.
Oh, I see. So it's sort of an urge towards vitalism then.
Yes, I would say that. But it's we're talking about strange etymological uses of the words here, so we can't really know for sure. But the way I read it, when I read it in languages I understand, the English one seems a bit more focused on the cowardice instead of the sort of the I guess the denial of the call to adventure.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Yeah. Okay, and in terms of other themes, so that's sort of courage and bravery. Another one I picked up on. Well, you've mentioned this before, but traveling does come up quite a bit. So there's a couple later on. Yeah, so stanza 35. Forth shall one go, nor stay as a guest in a single spot forever. Love comes doth loathing if long one sits, while the hearth in another's home. And then there's also 38, which is away from his arms in the open field, a man should fare not afoot, for never he knows when the need for a spear shall arise on the distant road. So there seems to be what I think what Thomas Carlyle might refer to as like nomadism a bit. What's your take?
Yeah, yeah, obviously. And I can certainly speak for the Norwegian culture for a long time has been one to welcome travelers and sort of vagabonds, I guess would be the English word. And if you can sort of cast your mind back to, well, not that many years ago, really, for us, uh, the elements are quite harsh, and there is quite far between each settlement, right? You would have to walk for potentially days at a time, but usually you would be able to walk, let's say, for a day or two between each small homestead. I think that's the right word, like just farmstead. And so that is a part of our culture which has lived on until quite recently, actually, where people would be able to sort of seek lodging for a night or maybe work for a week and then move on, pretty much.
No, certainly. And so I just want to quickly go back to the previous stanzas about courage because someone's commented that apparently in the German version it says unworthy man thinks he will live forever, which is similar to the English one, except it's got sluggard as opposed to unworthy.
Yeah, and
So
that's
that's
what I
the
said. I've seen coward being used in English as well, which yes, sluggard, unworthy. I think that's better use of the word, or that's a better description because, as I said, it's not necessarily about cowardice. It's more about you know denying adventure or denying potential.
no, absolutely. And so just quickly go back to the other point. So, but travel and is very much I think endemic to the Germanic or Norse spirits because they go on these long journeys in their ships to go raiding or exploring, or they go off to settle Iceland or even Greenland.
Yes, it's
Or,
something that is very much part of our nature even to this day. I mean, one of the more popular pastimes as sort of uh, I guess controlled as it has become is going for hikes, um, which can be everything from like a day trip or to multiple days where you uh, go for hikes over longer stretches in the mountains, right? Now, obviously, we live in the ashes, so it's a leisure activity version of something that was done for real a long time ago. So it's sort of become this like simulacra. Is that the word? Where it's like a copy of a copy. So is it really authentic anymore? I don't know, but there is something there. At least for me, I can sort of feel a connection to my forefathers much better when I'm in nature than when I'm not.
based, but it's true. And
Yeah.
also, and another thing is, obviously you being Norwegian, but I remember you did an article for Praxarchy about a artwork that I think was in the National Museum of Norway that they took away. It was the one with
Yes.
Leif Erikson, and
That's Leif
and you
Erikson
were
discovering America is the title.
yes, because in that article you were saying how this artwork is important because it's our national history and heritage, and they're trying to hide it. And Because not only that, this expedition to America, but also I think in that article you reference and people like was it? I think it's Roald Amundsen, these polar
Yep,
explorers
yep.
that
Polar
go off as
explorers.
well.
Yep. And as I said in the article, that is a very, at least to my people specifically, I can't speak for the Swedes and the Danes and the Icelandic people, but for my people, the explorer is a very crucial and central archetype, sort of the adventurer, not the raider or the warrior, although obviously they do sort of feature in the stories, but the explorer and the wanderer, in the sense, sort of, kind of in the way that Odin is, right? Is very much a core figure to this day.
No, absolutely. Though to defend your Scandinavian brethren, I think there's a bit of that in them as well. Like the Danes have got like a proud sort of naval tradition, and they have, you know, they once had colonies. I think in the Caribbean.
Oh
Like I think it
yes,
was
obviously
Saint Martin.
they
Yeah.
had it. I just can't speak of whether they have it today.
Oh right.
But
Oh
I'm
right.
sure they do. But I'm sure they do in some way, right?
Oh no, fair enough. Maybe we may have to ask Leo Borealis or Jay Green River, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe.
Right. So
Sorry, continue.
yeah. So back to other themes. Yes, there's also a couple about friendship or comradeship. So this is 41 through 44. So, friends shall gladden each other with arms and garments, as each for himself can see. Gift givers' friendships are longest found, if fair their fates may be. To his friend and man their friend shall prove, and gifts with gifts requite. But men shall mocking with mockery answer, and fraud with falsehood meet. To his friend a man a friend shall prove, to him and the friend of his friend. But never a man shall friendship make with one of his foeman's friends. If a friend thou hast whom thou fully wilt trust, and good from him wouldst get, thy thoughts with his mingle, and gift shalt thou make, and fair to find him oft. So again, going back to that stream on the Longhouse about loneliness, again, here in the Havamal, he's stressing the importance of friendship and forming strong social bonds with others.
Yes, I think there's other verses as well that reiterate the need for having friends you can bare your soul to, or sort of, I think the wording is almost empty your head, if I'm going to like literally translate it. Uh, Otherwise, you're going to sort of become a prisoner of your own body. It is something that returns a couple of times, and of course, as we said earlier, or as I said, here as well, you get the distinction of, you should honor your friends and be cruel to your enemies, pretty much.
No, certainly, and you need comradeship because if you're in the Viking Shield Wall, you need your comrades back, otherwise you're going to fall in battle, aren't you?
Obviously,
So
yeah. But also just, in everyday life. I mean, you said the loneliness stream. It's you can see the effects on society of thinking that we can sort of, I guess, not outsource friendship, but digitalize it. It's not the same, right?
no, it's not, and because I remember reading as well that the main reason for atomization is because that when you get a load of guys together, they form unbreakable bonds that can't be shattered. So
Yeah, and this is something that, as far as I gather from the women I have spoken with, this is just something they don't understand. Sort of the brotherhood between men, the fact that you can have friends that you will always be connected to, even if uh, you don't see them for years, and then you meet them and it's 5 minutes and it's like they never left, right?
mm, and all of this bullshit, and it's like, oh, you can't have close male friends. That's gay. Like, no, that's ridiculous. That's a modern subversion.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I think that is something unique to men, the male friendship, obviously, and it is something that should be cultivated because, I mean, I'm sure just from cultural clues, I've picked up that you mentioned the Greeks. I mean, that's something that features quite strongly there, isn't it?
Mm. No, the Romans as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you mentioned shield walls. I mean, I think the
Mhm.
Romans were the masters of that.
Oh yes, the Roman cohorts and legionaries.
Exactly. Um, I'm not sure if there's anything else to say here. I think there is some nuance in the way where maybe he's talking about almost like banter in one of them, because he says that you should return mockery with mockery, but it might just be that you should, it's an eye for an eye. It's hard to know.
And sorry, I meant to bring up the slide earlier, but I think this is the one by Froelich from his illustrated Edda. But with the Gestaffata, think that you're just sat in like some country tavern out in the middle of the sticks, and you've just got all these rustic Nordic folk about you as the cloaked one-eyed Odin is whispering this all to you in the corner while you quaff some ale.
Yeah, that is the
Very, very
imagery.
cozy.
Very cozy. Um,
And
there is a couple of stanzas. I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead here, but from 54 to 56, there's this. It gets this. It's a couple of verses dedicated to becoming too wise. I think is the English translation, which I find kind of funny because it's sort of like a bit of a course correction about you know what's the quote from let me dig it up. Uh, I've always liked that Adam Watts quote. A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts.
oh,
Which
that's
I
true.
think is a because you have to remember that at some point, you can't just think about things; you have to do them. And there's one, I think it's 23, which in my translation is the unwise man is awake all night and ponders everything over. When morning comes, he's weary in mind, and all is as burden as ever. So
Oh
there are
yeah.
some themes about sort of becoming trapped in your own intellect, almost. um,
Oh yeah, mine's the same meaning. The slightly different word choice, but yeah, it's pretty much the same meaning.
yeah, that's another thing I noticed. Then, obviously, um, I'm not sure if you have anything in the 70s you wanted to. There's
Well,
something about death in the mid 70s, I think.
well, yes, that's what I wanted to do. So the final three stanzas of the Gestaffata I wanted to go over because they are themed around death. So this is 77 through to 79. And this is actually one of the more famous sections of the Havamal. So cattle die and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. One thing now that never dies, the fame of a dead man's deeds. Cattle
Yeah,
die and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But a noble name will never die if good renown one gets. Certain is that which is sought from runes that the gods so great have made, and the master poet painted of the race of gods, silence is safest and best.
that
So
is
again, you
something
can
that. Sorry.
yeah. So again, you're going back, I think, a little bit to the idea of bravery or courage. That it doesn't matter if you die with a name that is famous and will be heralded for years to come. That it's worth it.
Yeah, there is a fearlessness in that way of thinking that is a way of living in the moment and living in true reality. If you could put it like that, that has been lost to us in modernity. I think it is what, when you read someone like Julie Zavola, um, it is something that he tries to sort of conjure sort of the mirage of what that was. And when I always liked that line that Vingel found of um, Werner Herzog when he talks about the Poetic Edda, because he says you need an organ for the mythological to understand these texts. Which
well,
I think puts it very well, because an organ is not something that, if you're not born with it, then, we can't get it back, really. So it's very strange for us to read about this and sort of, it's impossible to internalize the idea that you should sort of lay down your life willingly or live in a way where you're willing to do that at any moment. Because in modernity, we're just not wired that way anymore.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Ever though, because there's two passages from Revolt Against the Modern World which I want to come back to later. But I, funnily enough, was actually reading an essay by Ever earlier today, not about the Norse, but about the Romans, called the Roman Conception of Victory, which is from Metaphysics of War, and it's important because he talks about the Roman concept of the devotio. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's essentially Roman kamikaze. It's when a Roman officer would essentially do this religious ritual on the battlefield and then essentially suicide charge into the enemy lines, because they would pretty much every time they employed the devotio, the man would die, but they would win the battle. So it was this idea that they were beseeching the gods to grant them victory on the metaphysical plane, and so because it worked, they kept doing it. So
interesting. Yeah, it's something that you find in all ancient cultures that is certainly just, vanished today.
and again, but it's this whole this selfishness. You're obsessed with your own life and experiences and preservation, and you don't consider the wider society, culture, or your ancestors.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But as I said, it almost goes deeper than that, because I mean, you say you don't consider it, but it feels like you almost can't. And I'm not saying that you can't because you won't, but it's just we just don't have that pattern of thought in our brains anymore. I hate to sort of get all evolutional about this, but it's like we just evolved away that organ, as Herzog said.
I see. So the evolutionary pressures have ceased,
Well,
and
I'm not
we've
saying
lost
it's
it.
evolution. I'm just saying that it's almost like we just don't have that organ anymore to be able to think in that pattern. I'm sure we can rediscover it, right? Because it's just a way of being metaphysically. But it's so hard to um, exist outside of the waters you already swim in, right?
Well, when there was saying hard so soft times create weak men create hard times create strong men, and the cycle
I
continues. So
guess. And can you expect soft men to be hard men? I don't know, right?
no, no, definitely not.
So yeah, that's a bit of a black pill. I'm sorry.
Optimism is cowardice, to channel Oswald Spengler.
Yes. I like to be a bit more optimistic generally, but that's just who I am as a person. But yes, sometimes I can't help it. The black pills just sort of reveal themselves.
Well, I think that's enough. We've gone through all the main themes of the Gestafatta, so let's move on now to Odin's love quest. So this is a bit of a shorter section. So it's broadly broken into three. So the first 15 stanzas are sort of general advice on women and romance, and then he kind of does two sort of mini stories. The first story is to do with him and Billing's daughter, which is you can see in the image on the left, and then the end is to do with the story you mentioned before, how he acquires
where
the
he
mead of
steals the
poetry.
mead. Yeah.
Yeah, from Gunlod. Yeah,
And
so
he
you
does
mentioned
that by
the
seducing his daughter, which is the connection to dating here, or
yes,
to love. Yeah.
mhm. And so you mentioned this earlier. So was there any particular stanzas you wanted to share or go over?
I have to look at the English translations here in a moment because I forgot which one I wanted to highlight. Well, I think 90 is very good.
So I'm just bringing it up. So 90. Okay. The love of women, fickle of will, is like starting over ice with a steed unshod, a 2-year-old restive and little tamed, or steering a rudderless ship in the storm, or lame hunting reindeer on slippery rocks. Treacherous, I
Yes.
see.
I will
Um,
say that it is how can I put this? The Norwegian and the Norse one, I think, mentions a bit different things, but I think the messaging is the same here. But I think what's important to understand is that, you know, it's not meant to be a slight towards women. It's more meant to be sort of just like a statement of fact, and trying to
yes.
fight it is folly, pretty much.
And yeah, I think the main one there is that women are fickle. I mean, that's incredibly true.
It's very true. Um, and again, the humor sort of comes through a bit here.
Yes.
But in 91, he also goes into the women's effect on men, which I find interesting as well.
Yes, so that one. Clear now will I speak, for I know them both. Men false to women are found. When fairest we speak, then falsest we think. Against wisdom we work with deceit.
Yes. Check. Yeah, I think that's the pretty much the same in the Norwegian translation, more or less.
Yeah, again, I think this is to do with like infidelity because it's all to do with
Yeah.
deceits and being false, and not being
Yep.
true to your love or partner.
Well, I think it might be a generalization of the use of word man. That was the thing I was looking at, because I think in the Norse and Norwegian it uses specifically men. So it's saying that men specifically are, open to being, or men's hearts are fickle with women. I've seen it translated as, um,
Yeah,
to
that's
watch out for
true.
that.
I think that's fair because I mean, men are far more, shall we say, lusty or horny than women are. So yeah,
Yes.
I can believe.
Well, I mean, it can go a bit either way, but certainly on a societal scale, the men, and this is also a society who was more open to the idea of concubines for leaders and chieftains, right?
Oh yes, the Norse especially to concubinage. So okay,
Um,
any other significant stanzas you wanted to go over?
I like 92 just because I find it a bit funny.
Okay. Oh,
But I'm not sure if it's worth going over.
okay. Well, I'll read it. So soft words shall he speak, and wealth shall he offer, who longs for a maiden's love, and the beauty praise of the maiden bright. He wins whose wooing is best. So what I like is so it's sort of saying that flattering a woman by giving her gifts and wealth will only go so far, but honestly, just praising her and being nice is much more effective. Is how I'm reading this.
Yeah, and I think, don't quote me on this, but from what I understand from the Norwegian translation, it's calling out her physical appearance specifically. um, you can give her gifts, but you got to tell her that she looks nice as well.
Hmm. Yes, no, absolutely. And well, what I wanted to do is I just wanted to read the two bits, the two stories, so the Billing's daughter and Gunlod. So
Yeah, I really like Billing's daughter. I think that's interesting. He gets yeah. Well, we can read it and we can talk about it early after.
right, I'm just finding my place. Okay, so it's 96 through to 102. So this found I myself when I sat in the reeds, and long my love awaited. As my life the maiden wise I loved, yet her I never had. Billing's daughter I found on her bed, in slumber bright as the sun. Empty appeared an earl's estate, without that form so fair. Often again at evening come, if a woman thou wouldst win, evil it were if others than we should know of such a sin. Away I hastened, hoping for joy, and careless of counsel wise, while I believed that soon I should win measureless joy with the maid. And so came I next, when night it was, the warriors all were awake. With burning lights and waving brands I learned my luckless way. At morning then, when once more I came, and all were sleeping still, a dog found in the fair one's place, down there upon her bed. Many fair maids, if a man but tries them, false to a lover are found. That did I learn when I longed to gain, with wiles the maiden wise. For scorn was my meed from the crafty maid, and not from the woman I won.
Very good. I think this is interesting because even Odin can get sort of outsmarted by a woman.
Yes, and
sorry,
carry
what were
on.
you saying? Oh no, I was just saying when sort of you get overcome by the lust, even Odin can get fooled by a woman, but just in general as well, you know.
Indeed, tripping over your own dick to get into a bedchamber, and then, as you can see in the image, there's a vicious dog is guarding the way.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, yeah.
No, I was just looking at the translation, but I think it's I don't think there's anything more to. There's a bit more. It's a bit more conversational between her and Odin than your version, but that's just styling.
Interesting. So it's less narrating going on.
Well, when it's just the sort of when she's speaking to him, it's a bit more. Well, in my reading, the way I see it, it's a bit more flirtatious, just to underline the fact that she's just fooling him, really. So she's sort of playing him up by saying that, if you come back tomorrow night, and the way she's saying it has some implications.
I mean, that's fair, especially with because looking at the image again, they said this is Lawrence Frolick, so he was a Danish artist, so he would have fully understood the version that he would have probably read when doing this engraving. So,
right.
If you look at Billing, you can see there's a smirk on her. There's a small smirk on her face.
Exactly, and she's sounding a bit more sexy, if I can put it that way, when she's when I'm reading the Norwegian translation, which I think is part of her game, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. She's fooling Odin was a good night of fun.
Yes, exactly.
Playing hard to get, quite literally.
All right. Did you want to read the Gunloth?
Oh, yes. So, okay. So, though glad at home and merry with guests, a man shall be wary and wise. The sage and shrewd, wide wisdom seeking, must see that his speech be fair. A fool is he named who naught can say, for such is the way of the witless. I found the old giant, now back have I fared, small gain from the silence I got. Full many a word my will to get, I spoke in Suttung's hall. The mouth of Ratti made room for my passage, and space in the stone he gnawed. Above and below the giant's paths lay, so rashly I risked my head. Gunloth gave on a golden stool a drink of the marvellous mead. A harsh reward did I let her have for heroic heart, and her spirit troubled sore. The well-earned beauty well I enjoyed, little the wise man lacks. So Offrerir now has been brought to the mists of the men of earth. Hardly, methinks, would I home have come and left the giant's land, had not Gunlof helped me, the maiden good, whose arms about me had been. The day that followed, the frost giants came, some word of Hor to win, and into the hall of Hor, of Bolverk, they asked, where he back missed the gods, or had Suttung slain him there. On his ring swore often the oath, methinks, who now his troth shall trust. Suttung's betrayal he sought with drink, and Gunlof's to grief he let. It is time to chant from the chanter's stool. By the wells of earth I was. I saw and was silent, I saw and I thought, and heard the speech of Hor. Of runes heard I words, nor were counsels wanting. At the hall of Hor, in the hall of Hor, such was the speech I heard. I read. Hang on, it's going a bit too far there, but so essentially, Odin sneaks into the hall of Billing, who is a giant, and he woos Billing's daughter into giving him the mead of poetry, and then she helps him escape and covers up the act essentially.
Yes. What's interesting is that you almost, because the way it flows, you almost just started on the following verses, because he launches from that sort of story he's telling, that this is pretty much what I got out from the mead of poetry, the wisdom. And then he launches into there's a lot of stanzas which is just advice, right, from like 112 to I don't know, for a while. It's a very cool, just in terms of like it being read out, it's a very cool way of presenting the following advice, right? It's marrying
No,
the story with the and here's what I brought back, right?
no, I agree, but no, we won't quite get into the Loddfafnismal just yet. I still want to talk about the love quest a bit more.
Yes.
So, I mentioned going back to Evola. Well, this is where one of the passages from Revolt comes in. So I'm just going to pull that up quickly. Okay, so this is from chapter 11 of Revolt Against the Modern World, and the chapter that's called The Soul of Chivalry. So here's what Evola has to say.
Myself, so I can read along here.
Okay.
Chapter 11, was that it?
Chapter 11, yeah. Sorry, I don't have a page number.
I maybe find it. Unhierarchical relationship between royalty and priesthood, is that the one?
I think so.
Sorry, okay, if you have the quote, I could probably just find it later.
Okay, so it's the same theme runs through the stories of Habe, a perennial youth who becomes the spouse of the hero Heracles in the Olympic domain of Idun and of Gunlof, holder of the magic potion Odrahir, who attempt in vain to attain Freya, goddess of light, who is constantly yearned for by the elemental beings, of Brunhilde, whom Odin appoints as the earthly bride of a hero who will dare go through the flickering flames surrounding her hall. So what he's saying here, essentially, in the context of the chapter The Soul of Chivalry, is that if you look back through European or myth to the Norse, the poetic, the Eddas, you can find the origins of medieval chivalry, because Odin here is romancing a woman in order to achieve a quest or an objective.
Yep.
And again, there's a reference to Brunhilde, who is another figure who comes up in the Eddas. So she's not in the Havamal, but she's important for the myth of Sigurd Fafnismal, who, as he mentions here, Sigurd has to go through a wall of flame to reach her.
Yeah, and so the sort of chivalric spirit is a very, I guess you would say, Germanic Norse archetype, or I guess way of being that comes up again and again.
Yes, and another one ever does reference in Revolt when looking at the Norse, because there's actually a lot of references to the Norse in Revolt Against the Modern World. Yeah,
there's a lot.
And one of them is he references because because the tale of Sigurd Fafnisbane, there's so many versions. So there's the Volsunga saga, there's all the poems in the Poetic Edda, but there's also in the High German or High Medieval period, the 13th century, there's an epic poem called the Nibelungenlied, which is yeah, and obviously, High Medieval period, that's the height of chivalry. That features there too, and then later you've got obviously Wagner's operas as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap with Nibelungenlied and the Norse stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot of fighting on the internet which one was the origin, but I think going back, it's all part of the same sort of cultural root, probably.
No, because my understanding is the Nibelungenlied was based on the Eddas. It's just taking, instead of it being
Oh,
a
is it?
Norse poem,
Oh,
it's
I've seen so many people claim the opposite online, so I thought there was some fighting about that, but apparently not. Well, that's good.
well, from reading what Evola has to say, my own reading, so you've
I'll
got
take
the
Evola's word over some random people on the internet. So
yeah, so essentially you've got all of these Eddas, and then I'm not sure who wrote the Nibelungenlied, but whoever it was, it's believed at least must have read these Eddas because they were written around the same time as the Nibelungenlied. Well, at least when the Codex Regius, so whether the person read the work of
it probably
Sturluson and
got
then
the
composed it, or maybe they were going off some other source that we don't have. But essentially, it's the same story, but in a different version. So instead of it
yes,
being
yes,
a Norse poem, it's a High German Gothic romance. So
right. Okay, well, I didn't actually know it was based on it. I must have gotten some bad info, and well, it's the problem with reading Revolt is that it's so dense with information that you don't remember stuff like that until you've read
no,
it like multiple times.
yeah, because when I was doing my Voluspar episode, I was trying to find some contemporary sort of takes on it, and I thought, this is quite esoteric. I wonder if Julius Evo's got anything to say. And I was like, my
Obviously,
God, he's got a
yes,
lot to
pages
say.
upon pages. Yeah, I think he references sort of Norse culture multiple times in just the first couple of chapters. um, so yeah, I mean that is
Okay,
his
well,
way. He what is he uses he uses all of these as stars to guide him or something like that. That's what he says.
well, he's an esotericist, and he's fundamentally a universalist as well. So he draws on all these
Yes.
different cultures. So the Greek, the classics, the Indians, the Egyptians, the Norse,
Yep.
and
Yep.
the European culture too. So, was there anything else you wanted to go over with Odin's Love Quest, or shall we move on?
I think it's. I don't think we have anything else we wanted. I don't have anything else I want to say about this love quest. I think these two sort of speak for themselves. I'm sure there's some analysis that could be done on sort of like the meaning of the individual stanzas, but I'm more interested in what follows, to be honest.
Exactly. So let's move on. So I don't have a slide for the next bit because I couldn't really find any. There were no images from anyone regarding the next section, which is the Loddfafnismal. So for this one, we kind of go back to the style of the Gestafata, where it's all about wisdom and guidance. But this time, Odin is addressing a figure called a Loddfafnir. And Loddfafnir, the etymology, it means a stray singer. So it sounds like some like wandering schools, perhaps, who's learning from Odin.
It is Scald, yes. That's at least my understanding of who he's turning to, because the thing is that he has gained the meat of poetry, and the idea is that he shares some of that meat of poetry with people who became scalds, people who had sort of the wisdom and the wit to become scalds, had gained some of that mead. Basically, that was the understanding.
No, that's a good point. But I know we just came off the love quest, but there are some themes that come up again, and there's actually a couple of stanzas in the Loddfafnismal about love and romance. So here's
You can do that
stanza
first, yeah.
150. stanza 115. I read thee, Loddfafnir, hear thou my rede, profit thou hast if thou hearest, great they gain if thou learnest. Seek never to win the wife of another, or long for her secret love. So for the audience, in this section, those first two lines is a common refrain in the section where almost every stanza begins with him saying that. And so the language is a little archaic, but reed, R-E-D-E, is just an old word for counsel or to give guidance to. And awesome.
Sorry, I also like 113 and 14. But I mean that's a different thing than this. This is, pretty much the don't sleep with someone else's wife. That's pretty much what he's saying.
I mean, before the guidance was it was to the point, but a little bit esoteric. Here it's just a lot more blunt. So
yeah, which is what I find fun about some of these, because he'll sort of swap, and I'm sure it's from sort of some of the oratory nature of this, where you'll swap from very, as you said, more esoteric verses, and then just have like almost a break of just, oh yeah, and also don't do this, almost as a sort of like to shake up the the listening audience.
Perhaps they've had a bit too much to drink, so he's shaking you back into reality. But then there's another two stanzas later which go back to love and romance. This is 130 and 131. I read thee, Loddfafnir, hear thou my rede, profit thou hast if thou hearest, great they gain if that thou learnest. If thou fain wouldst win a woman's love, and gladness get from her, fair be thy promise and well fulfilled. None loathes what good he gets. I read thee, Loddfafnir, hear thou my rede, profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. I bid thee be wary, but be not fearful. Beware most with ale or another's wife, and third beware lest a thief outwit thee. So with the second one, again, he's sort of saying, be careful with someone else's wife and alcohol. It won't go well. But also, I like the fact he mentions a thief as if someone else may come along and snatch up your woman. So
exactly, yeah. Well, that's sort of the way of looking at it as well. You sort of had to look after your woman, I suppose. Not to comment on any sort of gender relations in the Viking Age. That's certainly a different topic.
And also the previous one, 130, he talks about gladness. So obviously, your woman should appreciate you.
Yes, of course. There's one about, I think, 13 and 14, which also sort of relates to this. If you could read those.
Sure. So I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. Beware of sleep on a witch's bosom, nor let her limbs ensnare thee. Such is her might that thou hast no mind for the council or meeting of men. Meat thou hatest, joy thou hast not, and sadly to slumber thou farest. Yes, I do remember reading this, and it does make me chuckle. I don't know whether the your version it's written differently, but how it's written in English is quite humorous.
It's written a bit differently, but the message is pretty much the same. What I did get from reading the Norwegian versions is a bit less focus on the magic and more just of being ensnared by a woman at the cost of society, basically.
Well, I'm reading it more as, don't get entangled up with a hag, you'll regret it.
Yeah, I think there's a level of both here, right? There's a bit of both. I think it's deep enough to accommodate multiple people's perspectives, which usually these things are good at. So everyone who listens gets something out of it.
Okay. So in terms of recurring themes, again, there's actually another couple that deal with friendship again. So I'll just give those a read. This is 119 to 121. I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest. great thy gain if thou learnest. If a friend thou hast whom thou fully wilt trust, then fair to find him oft. For brambles grow and waving grass on the rarely trodden road. I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. A good man find to hold in friendship, and give heed to his healing charms. I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. Be never the first to break with thy friend the bond that holds you both. Care eats the heart if thou canst not speak to another all thy thoughts. So again, not only is he stressing the importance of friendship, but it's about being loyal and true to your friends, and you shouldn't betray them, obviously.
But also the first one, which is one of the ones I've seen more often, just randomly online, that people use, is the one about paths overgrowing if they're not walked, as a metaphor for not staying in touch.
No, that's a good point. We must keep regular contact and networks, otherwise they'll shrivel up.
Exactly. Was it go to him often? It says, yeah. And in the sense, and you have to imagine for the Vikings that might be just as physical as metaphysical. If you don't walk the path, no one else will, because there's only one way to get to your buddy, right?
Yes. If I have to get in a ship and sail for a month to meet him again in Iceland, I'll do it. So
yes.
Well, is that expression comes to mind? Perhaps sometimes the journey beats the destination.
Yeah, maybe.
And the other. Sorry, carry on.
No, I didn't have anything. Never mind. I was just checking the translations to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
Right, because the only other theme really I've picked up on is a new one that's actually come to light in the Loddfafnismal. There's actually quite a few where he addresses evil itself, so I'm just going to bring those up.
Yeah.
So there's 117, which is, I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. An evil man thou must not let bring aught of ill to thee, for an evil man will never make reward for a worthy thought. And then there is 122 to 124. I read thee, Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. Exchange of words with a witless ape thou must not ever make, for never thou mayst from an evil man a good requital get. But a good man oft the greatest love through words of praise will win thee. Mingled is love when a man can speak to another all his thoughts. Naught is so bad as false to be, no friend speaks only fair. So again, you've kind of got friendship coming up again, but it's the idea of be friends with people who are good and honest, not evil scumbags, essentially.
Exactly, and well, it sounds easy when you read it like that, but I'm not that old, but I've certainly learned a lesson that it's hard to find good friends.
No, I agree with you from my own experience. There are people who I've been friends with and then not been friends with, and you think probably shouldn't have been friends with that person to begin with. So
exactly, yeah. And here is one other place where I think it's 124, where the Norwegian translation talks about sort of talking about everything in your head, or emptying your head with someone you trust, as a way of sort of bearing your soul, I guess would be the English equivalent.
No, I agree, but I also like the line from 122. You shouldn't exchange words with a witless ape.
Yeah. That is the same. I'm not sure. I can confirm if it's the same in the Norse or the Icelandic version, but the word ape is being used here as well, which I find quite funny.
I don't know. For some reason, it makes me think of Gandalf in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, where I think he's talking to Wormtongue, and he says, "I don't wish to exchange words with a witless worm."
Oh yes, yeah, seems about right. Maybe it's basically the same meaning. Yeah.
Mm,
I
yeah.
just found the use of the word ape was a bit funny. I think maybe worm
No, I agree.
would have been a better uh better use, but maybe it's a rhyme thing.
Well, we associate apes with, I think, stupidity and like uncouthness. So I think it's fitting.
Sure, but I mean, if you use worm, there's a more sinister nature to it, considering the
Mm,
following stances. It's not that
mm,
important. It's just you know
mm.
an observation.
Yeah. Okay. So that was everything I wanted to do with the Loddfafnismal. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up before we move on?
Let me double check here. There was maybe one or two I noticed. Maybe just because they're funny. um. Oh yeah, 118. Uh, I keep coming back to the ones where they slam women, but I can't help it.
From yeah, this one looks like it's women and evil. So I saw a
Yeah,
man who was wounded sore by an evil woman's word, a lying tongue his death blow launched, and no word of truth there was. Oh yeah, this is a good one. The lying tongue his death blow launched.
yeah. And in the end, it wasn't even true. So it's just all a lie, unfortunately. So yeah, be wary of the old, I guess, a version of this I've heard is, a man will wound your body, but a woman will destroy your soul.
True.
So I think that was the only other one that I really wanted to highlight. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here for anyone who's like listening and want to jump in. It doesn't take that long to read.
Mm. No, absolutely. Okay, so now on
Oh
to
wait, sorry, I
hmm?
have one.
Okay.
Um, did I knock something on my? You're sounding a bit low to me.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, maybe it's me. It might just be me. Just turn up my volume. Okay, I think it's. I have to find the number. Um, 126. I think it is.
Okay, so I
If
read
it's the one I'm
thee,
thinking of.
Loddfafnir, and hear thou my rede. Profit thou hast if thou hearest, great thy gain if thou learnest. A shoemaker be, or a maker of shafts, for only thy single self. If the shoe is ill made, or the shaft prove false, then evil of thee men think. Mm. So I think
This
they're
one
saying
is
if you don't make something properly, people are just going to think you're incompetent.
yes, but in the Norwegian translation, there is a couple of lines that are a bit differently written, and I would like to have a confirmation in the Norse, but I couldn't do that. But it implies a bit more of a sense of you being content with what you have, right? You should basically it implies that you shouldn't overreach, I guess.
Mm, that's
Does
quite
that
a
make
different.
sense?
I can see what you mean, but it's a very different reading to what I'm getting. So probably it's the
I
translation
agree.
there.
The English one is very different, specifically this one, and this might just be my reading when it's in Norwegian, because when you read it in English, and when I look at other English translations, they're a lot more to the point of just don't craft stuff that you can't do well, basically. uh, but there are like one line or two in here that are different in Norwegian that sort of specifically there's one line that's literally says you should be sort of content that you can manage on your own, would be the translation,
Mm.
with what you
Okay, so
have.
mm, so sort of being self-reliant on your own ability or what you have.
Well,
You
but
say.
yes, but then it's sort of weird that if it's your own stuff, why does that impact anyone else? It's I don't know. It's a weird. I just wanted to bring it up because it's a weird difference.
And so something else we haven't mentioned is the fact that with the Eddas and various translations, it's believed that at various points there have been what are called interpolations, where it's believed other people have tampered with the original text and added their own bits in. So maybe it's to do with that. Who's to say? It's
Most likely,
possible.
yeah, most likely. I just thought I'd point it out that when reading this version, I'm getting a different meaning.
Well, no, it's interesting, and it's nice to know that the different versions have this in them.
Yeah, I think it matches more the culture here a bit, especially the thing that you know the trying not to overreach or sort of taking on positions that you aren't capable of doing, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because being English and this being an English translation by an American, Henry Adam Bellows, I think in Anglo-American culture there's a strong emphasis on what you may call the Protestant work ethic, and so this seems to really lean into that. You should be a self-made man or businessman that can do your job well. So that seems to really tally with that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I didn't have any other Loddfafd um, stanzas I
Okay.
wanted to talk about.
Okay. Well, onto the Runatatal. So this is a relatively short section, but it's got so much packed into such a short space. So I want to actually read all of this. So I'm just going to bring it up. Okay, so this is stanzas 138 to 145. I ween that I hung on the windy tree, hung there for nights full 9. With the spear I was wounded and offered I was, to offer myself to myself. On the tree that none may ever know what root beneath it runs, none made me happy with loaf or horn, and there below I looked. I took up the runes, shrieking I took them, and forthwith back I fell. 9 mighty songs I got from the son of Bolthorn Bestar's father, and a drink I got of the goodly mead poured out from Offrerir. Then began I to thrive and wisdom to get. I grew and well I was. Each word led me on to another word, each deed to another deed. Runes shalt thou find and fateful signs, that the king of singers coloured, and the mighty gods have made. Full strong the signs, full mighty the signs, that the ruler of gods doth write. Often for the gods, Dane for the elves, and Dvalin for the dwarves, Elsmith for giants and all mankind, and some myself I wrote. Knowest how one shall write, knowest how one shall read, knowest how one shall tint, knowest how one makes trial, knowest how one shall ask, knowest how one shall offer, knowest how one shall send, knowest how one shall sacrifice. Better no prayer than bit too big an offering. Be thy getting measure thy gift. Better is none than too big a sacrifice. So Fund of old wrote ere man's race began, where he rose on high when home he came. So what's your read of the Runatal?
Oh, well, it's quite dense, isn't it? Obviously, um, it is a retelling of the beginning. You covered that in your video on Voluspa, didn't you? Just for anyone who's listening.
Um, the specific bit in the Runatal, I don't think it was in the Valispa.
Oh, I thought it was. Okay, never mind then. Well, before that, I would like to just comment on the beautiful artworks you have here. And I can't help but feel that the one by Collingwood to the left here has some Christian influence in it.
Yes.
I like the other two a lot more than the one on the left.
Mm. Yeah, so again, it's Collingwood and Frolic from their respective illustrations,
Yeah.
but so yeah, so in the Collingwood and Lawrence Frolic, this is in that very first stanza of the Runatatal. So what happens is Odin sort of sacrifices himself in this rite on Yggdrasil, the World Tree, where he hangs there. I think it's for 9 days, and
Yeah, I think he does. He stabs himself with a spear too, and I think he says he does it because he wants to understand what pain is. If I recall the translation.
it's interesting that you've got that line. I sacrificed myself to myself, which is
Yeah, that's a very interesting line.
yeah. Yeah, so again, no, I really like the artwork, and again with the Christian themes, I agree. When I first read that, I immediately thought of Christ's crucifixion because there's a lot of similarity. Because rather than
I
being on
do
a
understand, but there's a feeling which I think that Frolic captures a lot more when I read the Norse and the Norwegian one of him being entangled more than he's posted up on it like he is to the left here.
oh yeah, no, they're both good in their own right, but I agree. Yes, it's sort of got the torturous the tangling of the Frolic one.
Yeah, there's something about because he's is the implication, if I remember, that he is hanging from the world tree here, or is that just something I have made up?
No, so with my version of the Havamal that's in the Poetic Edda, there's lots of like guidance and references for a lot of the terms, and in there it does say that the tree is Yggdrasil, the world tree that he hung himself
Yeah,
from.
which is why I assumed as well, uh, which in a way would be, I hate to make up new terminology here, but he's sort of connecting himself to the world here, in an attempt to sort of gain understanding of something, and I can't quite figure out what, except he's, the runes and he talks about spells, which it gets very hard for me to understand, to be honest. Not necessarily that I don't understand what he's saying, but to infer what he is actually sort of winning back for the mortals, I guess, or what he's seeking.
Well, I think what he's doing is that by hanging himself from Yggdrasil, he sort of all he can do is think, right? Because he can't do anything. He's entangled
Yeah,
in this tree. So I think he's contemplating wisdom while
yeah.
he's in the tree, and this is how he comes up with the runes because the runes are the source of the magic, and then he teaches
I
it.
would
So
assume that as well. Yeah, that's sort of the tablets of knowledge that he returns with. Um, but I also, as I said, I think it's interesting, the wounded with a spear thing, and I can't find where I got that from, but I'm sure I felt that I got one translation that implied that it did it to understand pain, but maybe that was just a mistranslation. But it would probably just uh, connect with the wisdom stuff.
well, I'm thinking, well, in traditional sacrifice, there's always a letting of blood where the animal is stabbed. So maybe that's what it was. He's offering his own blood.
Probably yes. And it's a bit of a manual as well for the people listening, not necessarily that they should hang themselves from trees, but in the sense that, as you said, there's an offering of blood, there's the shades or sort of the outlines of a ritual here, right?
I'm sorry, it just came to my mind, but a little bit of a tangent. But have you seen the show Vikings at all?
No, I it was everywhere here when it came out, so I got kind of tired of it, and I was sure it wouldn't be respectful, but maybe it's better than I think.
Well, I did watch it, and the first couple of seasons were good, but it really loses itself at a certain point. But yeah, after reading more mythology, I do think it could have handled it a bit better. But it's interesting because it does, in the show, at several points, show its interpretation of Nordic human sacrifices. And something I just remembered is that when they stab someone to bleed them, in the show they actually put them up or hang them from like a tree.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, there's maybe
No,
some.
that was a form of punishment. You're right. This might be the origins of that, but I don't know. I don't quite see the connection between this as sort of like a ritual for wisdom versus a punishment.
Well, what I was more thinking is that line, "I sacrifice myself to myself." So
Yeah,
my
yeah,
understanding is that a Nordic human sacrifice is you take the sacrificial victim, you stab them to bleed and kill them, and then you hang their body from the tree, and it's
yeah,
left to lie there for several days. That's what Odin is doing. But normally you sacrifice someone to Allfather, but because he is the Allfather, he's sacrificing himself to himself.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It does. That he would, sacrifice because he almost there's a line, I think it's in 141, um, that sort of echoes this way of thinking. Um, with He said he got speech from his speech of speech, something like that. I don't have the English translation. Do you have
All
it?
right. So then began I to thrive and wisdom to get. I grew and well I was. Each word led me onto another word, each deed to another deed.
Yeah, that's a bit more beautiful. That's a bit of an embellishment compared to the one I have, because the implication I have here in my translation is that he plucked words from words, pretty much, which also sounds a bit weird. But in the sacrificing himself to himself, it sort of becomes the origin of wisdom. Then, right? This event.
And yes, as I said, so he's hanging on this tree for 9 days, and so he's all he does is contemplate, and he has
Exactly.
this revelation. And
Yeah.
again, going back to the comparison to Jesus' crucifixion, though Jesus isn't on the tree, he's still hung for several days, and he's
Mhm.
stabbed with a spear. And it's fair to say he's probably having some sort of spiritual epiphany or revelation while
Probably yes.
he's like that. And to go to the final image on the right here, so this is a replica of the Jelling Stone. It's a famous rune stone that was commissioned by Harald Bluetooth, the first Christian king of Denmark, and it's in the so it's found outside. It's in like a glass box. The reason I haven't got a picture of the original stone is because the only ones I could find, it's either too far away to see the detail, or there's like tourists around it. So this
Right.
is a replica that's in the National Museum of Denmark, which is
This
colorized,
one.
which it makes the detail easier to read. And as you can see, this is supposed to be Jesus' crucifixion, but as you can see, he's not on the
It's
cross.
Odin.
He's entangled in a tree like Odin.
I imagine it might actually be a. I mean, it's fun to me to think of it this way, but um, it might just be a case of, well, we're supposed to be drawing Jesus now, but the craftsman sort of just doing what he always does, and then we just call him Jesus.
Well, I'm just thinking that it's been discussed elsewhere that Christianity is a resoundingly adaptive religion, and that
Oh yes,
it's not universal. It adapts itself to local traditions, and so what I think personally is Harald Bluetooth's thinking. I need to try and get the people to become Christians, so let's incorporate a bit of our old religious tradition into
yeah,
our way of
most
how we
likely.
do it. Yes, and we'll get people to go along with it. You replace. See that Jesus is like Odin. He sacrificed himself, and you swap them round. So
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I I generally don't want to, you know, pour more fuel on the fire of the pagan versus Christian, online fighting, because I think it's a very online fight, not a very real life fight. But when I see a lot of the Christians every Christian I see either online or in real life today don't seem to mesh with the Christianity that I read about when I read about my own nation's history and its history with Christianity. Their way of being is totally different from the picture I have of my forefathers.
Well, that's really interesting. Um, and
Well, it's
'cause
one of those. It's hard to say without like getting into like weird ecclesiarchical debates, which I'm probably going to lose because someone's going to pull out some Bible verse that's going to own me. Uh, but increasingly, I feel that the spirit of my people don't mesh with whatever Christianity has become. Maybe it did once, as you said. It's a highly adaptive religion. Maybe it can adapt retroactively again, but I find more solace in these things, such as Havamal these days, than I do Christianity, to be honest.
mm, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's too many people in our circle who are, I think, disrespectful towards paganism, no matter its form, whether it's the ancient classic paganism or especially the Norse paganism. I find they're very disrespectful towards, and if you read it, there's lots to learn, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, and
So
that's not to say that I want to revive it or even think that that's possible. Some do, and I'm not sure. But I mean, I feel that a lot of online Christians are very quick to condemn uh, people for even trying. Right? I think I
mm.
think there's more to be gained by sort of having respectful understanding, I suppose, between each other than sort of calling each other heretics.
Certainly, and though just going back to the Odin Jesus question, though you seem to have
Oh,
these
sorry, can I add
similarities,
one more thing,
certainly,
which
yep.
I forgot to add on the end here, because I think that when I think back on sort of the greatness that built the West, I think that was the marriage of Christianity and the local cultures here, right? Which is, that stone on the right. That is the kernel that built the West, isn't it?
Yes, it's a syncreticism, if you will.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, carry on.
Uh, yes, so sorry, trying to my train of thought. Right, so going back to again comparing Odin and Jesus, um, though we've picked up on these similar threads here with the sacrifice, and it's also interesting considering we've just had Easter, which is we celebrate the don't know if celebrate's the right word, but we reflect upon the death of Christ. There's actually another connection which I came across, which I want to go over very quickly. So here's another two images. So other than the sacrificial motif, there's also another thing they share. Both Odin and Jesus went to hell.
Mm.
So on the left here, we've got another work by Collingwood called Odin Rides to Hell, and I love this image. And I mentioned I've got the Havamal Study and Reaction by Imperium Press. Well, on their version of that, this is the image they have for the cover, and they've got it in a nice striking crimson, which looks epic. So
Oh, very
um,
nice.
yeah, and then on the right here, this is a Renaissance painting of Christ going into limbo because, as I said, we've just had Easter. So what was Jesus doing in those 3 days between his death and then his rebirth in Easter? Well, there was an
Yep.
event called the Harrowing of Hell where he goes to hell and he saves the souls of people. And so with Odin going to hell, I actually looked into this to try and see what reason did he go there, and I couldn't find a reason why. So the only thing I can speculate is
Why Odin goes there?
yeah. So this is what this
I
picture on the left is supposed to represent. He actually does visit hell at one point.
He does. I think I'm pulling on like old memory here, but I think he goes to help a friend. I want to say a friend. Let me look it up here in like Norwegian because that's the thing. Like if you can't find it online English with this stuff. You can just search for it in like Nordic language and usually find more information.
That's good, yeah, good to know, because I tried to look and I couldn't find it. I speculated that maybe because he was very sad over the death of his son Balder, so I wondered whether maybe
Yeah,
Balder was
that's
trapped
the
there.
one. Yeah, it's from Baldur's Draumar, which is Baldur's Dreams. Is it called the story?
Yes, in
So I
that
think
poem,
you're onto the same thing. Yeah.
well, in that poem, he goes not quite into hell, but he goes near it, and he summons a Volva to ask her about the that boulder. So that's interesting, because here you've got the father going to get his son back, whereas Jesus is the son who was sacrificed to his own father, if that makes sense. So it's a bit of a strange inversion in the comparison, but I still think it's interesting that you've got this idea of the
I
divine
think it
being.
reflects to bring up the to bring up the schism once again. I mean, any pagan would probably say that the inversion is the problem with Christianity, right? Because it is. I mean, someone like a Nietzschean would probably say that that sacrifice is slave morality, while Odin rescuing family from hell is more heroic and strong-willed, right?
Yes.
Not to say that I've read passages from Jesus's journey to hell, or what it's called, but and it's quite it's quite metal as well. Let's put it like that.
Oh yes, very, very metal. While on this, it's brought another port to my mind. So I mentioned Imperium Press. Well, Mike from Imperium Press, who's the editor, he's got a concept which he's sort of adapted from a French Indo-European scholar called George Dumazil, which is called Mitra Varuna, which Mike calls Odinic and Tyric. And the difference between the Odinic and the Tyric is that the Odinic is is obviously from Odin, but he's like the wild sorcerer king, the heroic will, who often is quite daring and transgressive. And then the opposite to that is you have the Tyric, which is the Norse god Tyr, who is very lawful and orderly,
Yeah,
and
very
is all
much
about
order and yeah.
And I just noticed that I think Jesus is a very Tyric figure.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And I think that's a much better way of looking at it. I agree. When I said the things about Christianity being slave morality, I wasn't saying it as if it's my belief. I don't think it is necessarily. I think
well,
a
let's put
lot
it
of the
that.
modern incarnations are, but I don't think that is the root, right?
Well, no, as Mike says, you've got like the trad right and the radical right. The trad right is Tyric. The radical right is Odinic.
Yeah, I can agree with that. uh, that's a very good way of putting it.
Mm. Right. So that was all I had to say on this. Oh, sorry. Just remembered. There was another passage from Eva that I wanted to read on the back of this, so I'm just going to bring that up quickly.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so this is another one from Revolt. So this is chapter 11. Chapter 5. Sorry, the mystery of the right. And I actually do have a page for this. So this is pages 30 to 31.
All right. Bring that up so I can read along. That always helps. 30 to 31. Okay.
Yeah, so in the Nordic tradition, the same idea is expressed through Odin's sacrifice to the cosmic tree Yggdrasil, through which Odin draws out of the abyss the transcendent wisdom contained in the runes and puts it to good use. Also, one specific version of the myth, Odin, who is viewed as a king, through his sacrifice points the way that leads to Valhalla, namely, to the type of action that always allows a person to partake of the heroic, aristocratic, and Uranian immortality. So whatever Lewis is saying is more or less what we've already said, but grand wisdom is attained through this because the context of the chapter, the mystery of the rites, is that he's expressing the importance of the rite of sacrifice in traditional
Yes.
culture,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it shows dedication and devotion.
Every yeah, and that's sort of his point with this, is that um, uh, this wisdom and this sort of passage into the metaphysical, or into godhood, really, is what he's saying, has to happen through sacrifice. It cannot be attained without it. So you have to have a society that is reared or geared towards creating moments of sacrifice, or having ritualistic ways of attaining it. And it sort of reminds me of Guinan on his chapters in, which I made a video on his chapters in The Reign of Quantity, when he talks about the loss of guilds and the rites of passage in guilds and attaining, and the way craftsmen attain wisdom and skill. It echoes the same sort of way of thinking uh, as Evola writes about in the mystery of the right. And I think it ties a bit to what we talked about earlier in the when it comes to modernity and the century of the self, so to speak. um, how hard it is to attain something like that when society is geared entirely in the opposite direction. Creating moments for sacrifice, whether small or large, is the last thing society wants to do. Is to create
Mm.
moments where you can get hurt, where you can get or you can willingly put yourself in danger of any amount.
Yes, no, because it's very sheltered and safe centric. That old saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You
Yes,
can't acquire deep, metaphysical, esoteric knowledge for nothing. You've got to sacrifice something for it.
exactly. And when you can't do that, when you have a society that can't do that, that's a society that can't produce great men.
No,
Is the
exactly.
logical conclusion.
Mm.
Unfortunately. Another black pill. That's how it goes when you start reading Evola. It ends up with it just ends up at sadness.
Well,
There is hope
mm,
in it, finally.
yeah. I mean, if you've read Ride the Tiger, I think that's a little bit more because he gives you a path out of
Exactly, that's what I'm
this.
saying. There is hope in sort of suffering through it, or I guess prevailing within it, within um, I guess the Kali Yuga, um, as you said, riding the tiger.
And yes, and because I think there's a very important message in that because in the early chapters of Ride the Tiger, he's talking about Nietzsche a lot, and he's really riffing off of Nietzsche's idea of the because we spoke of Odinic and Tyrrhic. Well, Nietzsche's got his
Yeah,
Apollonian versus
exactly.
Dionysian,
Yeah,
and he's saying for Ride the Tiger, Apollonian is the rational, self-interested, strong-willed individual, while Dionysian is the chaotic, dark individual. But there is
yeah,
benefits to both, and to ride the tiger, you need to combine both together. You need to open oneself without losing oneself.
yeah, exactly. And there's ways of doing that, and then you get into his more esoteric stuff with the different paths and the magic and and all that. But I think being able to, despite modernity, uh, getting to know sort of the both in terms of yourself, but also in terms of your place in society, both the the Tyrrhic and the Odinic uh, within yourself is the only way forward. Without, I don't know, without going mad, I suppose. I mean, how can you survive without doing a full exit, at least? I mean, you could I suppose just sort of leave it all behind and try to live on a farm somewhere and hope that no one comes knocking. But increasingly, I feel that that's not a that exit, as it were, isn't a real option.
Yes, because
You have to be able to. Sorry.
you know, I was just saying because Charlemagne did that video called "There Is No Exit," and he's right. You've kind of got to at some point turn around and pick your hill to die on, and to bring up Spengler again. But there's that final chapter of A Man in Technics where he just, where he says optimism is cowardice. A Western man has to be like, the soldier at Pompeii who wasn't relieved from his duty as he stood there, stoically as the whole world burned around him.
Exactly. And well, I don't know. It's hard to see that any other sort of outcome than yeah, hellfire and brimstone is the way out. But if nothing else, I would be sort of willing to say that I tried. You know.
And that's what Spengler means by that analogy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Western man needs to come out with a bang, then with a whimper.
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay, was there anything else you wanted to go over on the Runatatal, or shall we move on to the final section?
Yeah, let's. I mentioned magic, so let's let's move on to the magic portion of.
Oh yes.
Sorry, no, that's the lawyer's hall. Sorry, the Runatatal. Yeah, that comes first.
Well, in the final section, which is the Loddfafnismal, it kind of is magic because it's essentially a collection of what are called charms, so sort of magical verses.
But I'm sorry, I thought you said Loddfafnismal, but yes, let's do Runatatal if you want to do that.
Oh, so we just went over the Runatatal.
Oh, yeah. No,
Well,
I'm getting a bit tired. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers and I'm getting confused. Yes. Okay.
I think
148 and on. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, to be
that's the
fair,
magic.
we were talking about the Runatatal, and then we went off on the magic on a bit of a tangent, and now of coming back to the working
I got
question.
slightly confused, but yes, okay. So I was right. We were about to start on the magic, but I'm not sure if we want to do that. As you said, it's mostly just actually presented as here's a bunch of spells.
Oh, well, it's interesting that he's numbered them all because it's like, the third I know, the fourth I know,
Yes.
and then there's 18 in total.
Mm-hmm.
Because from what I'm
there is some wisdom in some of them. If I can find the.
Well, it's interesting because in the Runatatal, he briefly mentioned the dwarves. Well, there's another mention of the dwarves again. 160, a 15th I know, that before the doors of Delling saying, Fiophrarir, the dwarf, mighty sang for the gods, and glory for elves, and wisdom for Hrotsetir the wise.
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. Thank gods. I'm just checking the translation to see if there's any, but I don't think there is.
Because obviously in the world of the Norse, other than the gods, you've also got the fantasy conception of elves and dwarves goes back to the Norse as well. That's where Tolkien got the idea from.
No, I was just checking the translation. I don't think there's anything different here. I think mostly it is mythological stuff. But I think there is some in some of these. There are hidden rites and sort of well, I say spells, but we get back to the whole like the mindset for the mythological living in a world where you believe that this is true. Let's say 158, for example, basically describes like a pre-battle ritual someone can do on a warrior, right?
A 13th I know, if a Thane full young, with water I sprinkle well, he shall not fall, though he fares mid the host, nor sink beneath the swords. Oh, yeah, that's a very good one for a battle, especially with Thane, because for those who don't know, Thane in Germanic culture, Norse or Anglo-Saxon, is sort of the context can differ, but in some it's either a minor nobleman or it's a quite a renowned warrior of a host.
Yeah, it is. And 156 as well is kind of the same thing, which I know I think we talked about it, but I like the emphasis on song and poetry in Norse culture, and this being married with battle. And I remember reading, I don't have a source for this, but I do remember reading about Englishmen and Europeans being terrified of the Viking ships because they would sing as they came along in them. Not necessarily for plunder, but just in general, passing by, they would be singing. And they had this very strange guttural way of singing. So song is very much a crucial part of the Norse tradition.
Well, song helps get your blood up and your morale and courage up as
Exactly.
so.
Yeah.
I mean, later on when you get to when you have armies with regiments, they all have their regimental musicians with
Yeah.
the drums and the
It becomes
trumpets. So
it's part of every culture pretty much, but I like that it's very clear in sort of the Havamal here that song is a way of life.
speaking of song, he actually makes another reference to Loddfafnir in stanza 163. Long these songs thou shalt, Loddfafnir, seek in vain to sing. Yet good it were if thou mightest yet get them. Well if thou wouldst them learn, help if thou hast them.
Maybe I have a different. Let me check. Was it 163?
163, yes.
Oh, it's 162 in my version. I don't know
Okay.
why. Yeah, maybe that's something wrong. Let me just read it.
Yeah, maybe you've got maybe I've got an interpolated version, possibly. Maybe there's like an extra stanza in there.
Oh yeah, maybe. I mean, I know there are different versions that like numerate the stanzas differently as well. So there's enough confusion going around this. Um, could you read it again? I'm sorry.
Okay. Long these songs thou shalt, Loddfafnir, seek in vain to sing, yet good it were if thou mightest get them, well if thou wouldst them learn, help if thou hadst them.
Ah, yes, yeah. So it's a bit of a callback to that earlier rhythm, but also, I guess, a call to action to the skald listening to this.
Yes, you sort of take a note of everything I've said to you because you yourself will have to share this with
Exactly.
others.
I think 161. Is this the
Oh,
one
yes,
with the cunning woman?
yes, he mentions a maiden. A 16th I know, if I seek delight, to win from a maiden wise, the mind I turn of the white-armed maid, and thus change all her thoughts.
I think that is. Hang on a moment. Let me find the 161. Oh, it's using language that is very difficult for me to understand. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
I'm trying to read the Norse one because I'm getting some issues with I'm trying to, maybe you know that, because I'm trying to understand the line about the white-armed wife, which is what I wanted to ask you about, really. You had any thoughts on that?
The white-armed maid.
Yes,
Maybe they're just saying she's pale, possibly. Because
maybe.
the thing is, as in Germanic culture, obviously, or European culture, traditionally, the being pale was seen to be beautiful. So maybe that's what that's a reference to.
Right, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was the only one I had written down here.
But yeah, that's the general gist of the Loddfafnismal and what it means, and that is the end of the Havamal. Any other sort of final thoughts or comments you wanted to make?
Well, if you have an afternoon, you can pretty much read all of it. It probably just takes, an hour or two, depending on the speed. And so I would recommend everyone reading them because they're, as I said, they're actually quite catchy. And if you get a good translation, it sounds like you have quite a good translation, Hitman. The ones I've seen online are a bit hit and miss. So I would recommend everyone to read it, really, because
Yeah, so just to go over that again, it's the Henry Adams Bellows translation done in the 20s, which is, well, this is Imperium Press edition, but they use his translation. And so they use his translation for both the Havamal itself as part of Studies in Reaction, or as the whole Poetic Edda as well. They use his translation for all of it too. And they also keep his original introductions as well, which is cool.
that's very good. Maybe I'll have to pick up one. I have so many. I have a rule because I'm so far behind on books. And I say behind. This is part of the ego death we talked about, right? You have probably read a lot more than me when it comes to these things. I'm still working my way through Spengler, but I mean that's a brick and a half. So
Oh yeah.
I'm doing like a little bit here, a little bit there, while I'm reading other stuff. And so I have this rule of like not buying more books than I can actually read, right? So my backlog keeps growing, but I can only read one book at a time. That's my rule. Which means that, now my backlog is just even bigger because now I have to have the Imperium Press version of them all on the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I've got a decent backlog of books at the moment, so once I get through some, then maybe I'll get some more. But so many books, so little time.
Exactly, right. That's the problem. And well, that's I could buy more books and sort of just read a bit here and a bit there. I know some people do that, but I like being able to read through a book at least once and then sort of put it away and then come back to it later, which I've found is not the way to go with someone like Evola, because it's hard to make that stuff stick. You have to read it multiple times. And I know
Yes,
people
because
like annotate like all his books and have like multiple passes and stuff like that. So I probably have to reread Revolt at some point.
yes, because I said when I've gone back for doing my research for Voluspa and Havamal, going back and reading some of those sections again was really enlightening. I really felt like I got some of what he was saying a lot better. Because I think one thing I really want to encourage people to do actually is just reading Evola and Spengler on their own isn't enough. You really need to read the source material they're drawing on, and everything they say will make a lot more sense once you do that.
I would agree. Yes. I when I read Revolt, I connected a lot more um with his Norse examples because obviously I knew the origins, right? I knew what stories he's talking about. And so those parts of the book where he references that sticks a lot better than others, right?
No, understandably, yeah. Because for me, when I read it, I think the bits on classical history were the ones that I got more than the others.
Right, that would make sense. Also, I would also, in terms of Abel, I would recommend reading Gwynon, The Reign of Quantity. It's not a very big book, and a lot of his, a lot of you can learn a lot of how Evola thinks by reading Gwynon.
Well, he
strangely
was.
enough.
Well, Ella did consider Gwenon his mentor, though I've yet
Exactly.
to get
Well,
around
yes.
to
So
read.
maybe it's not strange. That's the wrong word. But uh, certainly, reading Evola makes a lot more sense if you've read Gwenon.
Hmm. Well, they were operating out of a similar tradition, though sadly I haven't gotten around to reading any Gwenon yet, though I do want to read Regular Quantity and Crisis of the Modern World, which was one of the inspirations, along with Decline of the West by Spengler, for him writing Revolts, because he did the
Exactly. Yeah.
Italian translations to both of those works.
Mhm.
So as a sort of finishing point, what I also wanted to do is I've got two passages from Thomas Carlyle in his On Heroes, Hero Worship and the Heroic of History, which is a series of lectures. His first lecture is on Odin and it's called The Hero as Divinity. And I just want to read these because I think they give a really good summary of Odin and Norse culture, especially as we've seen through the Havamal. So I'm just going to pull that up one moment. Okay, so here's the first one. Of the chief god Odin, we shall speak by and by, mark at present so much, what the essence of Scandinavian and indeed of all paganism is, a recognition of the forces of nature as godlike, stupendous, personal agencies as gods and demons. Not inconceivable to us, it is the infant thought of man opening itself, with awe and wonder, on this ever stupendous universe. To me, there is in the Norse system something very genuine, very great, and manlike. A broad simplicity, rusticity, so very different from the light gracefulness of the old Greek paganism, distinguishes this Scandinavian system. It is thought, the genuine thought of deep, rude, earnest minds, fairly open to the things about them, a face to face and heart to heart, inspection of the things, the strength, a great rude sincerity, discloses itself here. It is strange, after our beautiful Apollo statues and clear smiling mythices, to come down upon the Norse gods brewing ale to hold their feast with Aegir, the sea Jotun, sending out four to get the cauldron for them in the Jotun country. For, after many adventures, clamping the pot on his head like a huge hat and walking off with it, quite lost in it, the ears of the pot reaching down to his heels, a kind of vacant hugeness, large awkward gianthood characterises the Norse system, enormous force as yet altogether untutored, stalking helpless with large uncertain strides. So what was your thoughts on that passage?
I lost you there for a second. Towards the end, what did you say?
Oh, so what were your thoughts on that passage?
I think he's right. I think he's embodying a bit of that English snobbery, obviously, when he's looking down on, or when he's calling it crude. But I do understand why he's saying it, because it's a very it is a very true and honest and open way of sort of interacting with the metaphysical and the mythological. That, well, certainly as abstracted as we have become today, it's, and I think even at Carlyle's time, it was becoming difficult to sort of reach that mode of being without going through something like the Norse mythology. Do you agree?
No, absolutely, and to be fair, Carlisle is Scottish, so but
Oh, sorry.
beside the yeah, but then again, I don't think he had a problem because when talking about British culture, he tends to say English, so he was a Scotsman who was perfectly happy in being in an English world, which is
Well,
unusual.
I
But
think my point still stands that for us on the outside, the British academics have a tendency to uh, to look down on everything that isn't British when you read them.
and that's a fair point. But yeah, with Carlisle, because at another point in the that lecture, he sort of says, you know, a lot of British people look down on the Norse, but you shouldn't. There's a wonderful heroism here. He says the same on the lecture on
Exactly. Yeah.
Muhammad. He says a lot of Europeans and Christians look down on Islam, and he's like, well, you shouldn't scoff Islam. It's not fake. It's a genuine religion and a mode of being.
Yeah,
So
and I think that's important, and I get that that's what he's saying, and that uh, you know, we got this far because of these religions and these cultures and these modes of being, and they're about to be lost at the time of Carlisle, if not way before then, should you believe someone like Evola. So as I said, it's interesting to see him trying to reach back. It's strange because it's like you're looking through, like we are sitting here today looking through like or it's like a game of telephone. Is that the name of the game? Where like one person like whispers a sentence to the one next to you, and then like by the
Uh,
end what comes out is very different, right?
well, here in this country we call that Chinese whispers, but
Okay,
it's the
Chinese
same
whispers
thing.
then. It's kind of like that. Like imagine like we have like a weird like kaleidoscopic telescope that we're using to look at Carlisle, who's doing the same thing with the towards the Norse uh, uh, mythology and culture and mode of being, right?
Mm.
And trying to like pull on that thread to see if we can we can get something out of it.
Well, the main thing Carlyle latches onto is that, again, you see this in the Muhammad lecture, is that he loves sincerity. He would prefer something
Exactly.
be
Yeah.
a bit rustic and a bit rude and a bit simple, as long as it's honest and sincere, than anything that's
That is
pretentious and
certainly
fake.
something you get in the Norse mythology. As I said, the characters or the gods really embody human qualities. It's got a bit of a humor. It's not afraid of sort of making fun of well, even sort of the narrator at times, right?
Mm. No, absolutely. Well, there's actually another passage which I want to read from him too.
Sure, go
Just
ahead.
going to get one moment. So, Odin's runes are a significant feature of him. Runes and the miracles of magic he worked by them make a great feature in tradition. Runes are the Scandinavian alphabet. Suppose Odin to have been the inventor of letters as well as magic. Among that people, it is the greatest invention man has ever made, this of marking down the unseen thoughts that is in him by written characters. It is a kind of second speech, almost as miraculous as the first. You remember the astonishment and incredulity of Atahualpa, the Peruvian king, how he made the Spanish soldier who was guarding him scratch Dios on his thumbnail, that he might try the next soldier with it, to ascertain whether such a miracle was possible. If Odin brought letters among his people, he might work magic enough. Writing by runes has some air of being original among the Norsemen, not a Phoenician alphabet, but a native Scandinavian one. Snorro tells us farther that Odin invented poetry, the music of human speech, as well as that miraculous runic marking of it. Transport yourselves into the early childhood of nations, the first beautiful morning light of our Europe, when all yet lay in fresh young radiance as of the great sunrise, and our Europe was first beginning to think, to be. Wonder, hope, infinite radiance of hope and wonder, as of a young child's thoughts, in the hearts of these strong men, strong sons of nature, and here was not only a wild captain and fighter, discerning with his wild flashing eyes what to do, with his wild lion heart daring and doing it, but a poet too, all that we mean by a poet, prophet, great devout thinker and inventor, as the truly great man ever is. A hero is a hero at all points. If the soul and thought of him first of all, this Odin, in his rude, semi-articulate way, has a word to speak, a great heart laid open to take in this great universe, a man's life here, and an utter great word about it. A hero, as I say, in his own rude manner, a wise, gifted, noble-hearted man, and now, if we still admire such a man beyond all others, what must these wild Norse souls, first awakened into thinking, have made of him? To them, as yet without names for it, he was noble and noblest, hero, prophet, god, Wotan, the greatest of all.
Very good. And I think for a bit of context, a lot of the runes that we find today are carved in stanza form as well. Um, Not everything, of course, but a lot of it, which means that either the way the Norse thought about writing was a form of poetry, not just sort of thinking in reign of quantity terms, not just noting down facts, but actually writing magic, as in preserving things for future generations, which in a way that couldn't have been done
No,
earlier,
certainly.
right? And to a people that couldn't
Mm.
do that, of course, that's magic, right? And so that, I think, to me,
No, no, absolutely adds
is a
it.
bit of a different perspective in terms of like the joining of poetry and writing in a way that other cultures maybe moved away from.
You can also appreciate why Carlyle latches onto it because if you read his other work, he absolutely rails against what he calls the sham captains, the reduction of everything to the cash nexus, the destruction of bonds
Right.
and the human spirit.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. It's interesting to theorize if it had been left in isolation, what would the Norse language have evolved into? If that heroic spirit into language form had been allowed to sort of grow on its own without any interference from modernity, but maybe that was never in the
But it
cards.
probably, mm, yeah, imagine what would have happened if they'd not converted to Christianity, because I imagine that's where a lot of the influences changed. Because obviously, adapting to a Latin
Most
script
likely, yeah.
would have had a
Yeah,
substantial effect.
yeah, and what is scripture in that sense, if not just writing down facts and sort of, as you said, the the bean counting and all that, because it strikes me, and I'm just theorizing here, and as I said, it strikes me as the Old Norse, the language, the purpose of language was different.
Yeah, no, it was obviously I don't want to say to entertain because it sounds a bit like lowbrow, but it's to bring spirits. It's poetry, it's knowledge, it's lore.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the first sort of the primary function isn't to store information. Now that might have evolved as sort of like a secondary function, but that doesn't seem to be the primary function in the things that we have, that sort of the archaeological stuff we still have. But I mean, it's hard to know because once you get to sort of the Viking Age, which is when the influences start becoming quite big from the outside world, it seems that the writing becomes more uh, modernized. Let's put it like that.
Yes, because languages tend to become more refined as time comes on and other influences come in.
Yes,
Because
and the
English
need for
now,
information supersedes the need for, I don't know, metaphysical expression, I guess.
yes, the religious importance and cultural importance fades away to rank materialism.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to be able to write accountant books. That's more important.
Indeed. So, any other final thoughts or?
Not that I can think of. Hopefully, I've been able to provide something of value here. As I said before we started, I'm not an expert in this at all, so I really enjoyed it at least.
Yes, no, this was a wonderful discussion, and thank you for coming on to talk about it. So, was there anything you would like to shill before we finish?
Yeah, sure. If anyone's listening to this right now, or let's say tomorrow morning, every Thursday we have a show on my channel, a Walrus, called The Long House. We are going to have a show tomorrow night at 8 p.m., which is 8 p.m. Central European time. I also have a Twitter, and you can find the links to all my socials on the channel. On Twitter, I do a bit more shit posting or try out new ideas that might eventually end up as Substack posts on my Substack, or maybe I'll talk about it on the channel in one of the live streams. And I think that's about it.
Oh, wonderful. Everybody sub to Walrus and watch the Longhouse. There's some good streams with some great guests. For myself, in a couple of weeks' time, I will be doing a stream with Marcus, bringing him back again. On that occasion, we will be discussing the book My Reminiscences of East Africa by Paul von Nassau-Vorbeck. And so we'll be going over the East Africa campaign of World War I from the German perspective. So it's a great read. It's going to be a great discussion with Marcus. So stay tuned for that. So thank you all for watching, and good night.